Hello. Okay, we are going to get back started once again. So if you can find your way back to your table. I wanted to introduce as well, this is Allie Anderson. She is our other new forensic interviewer. So team members, welcome her, thank you. You'll be seeing more of her later. All right, we're going to hand it back over to Pete to continue teaching us.
To the practical things that we can do working with kids and adults who struggle with executive functioning skills. When it comes to working with kids, I can either go through a lengthy discussion or just tell you, read that. Read that. This is an absolutely amazing document. If there seems to be a parent with whom you're working that struggles to get where their kid is at when it comes to development of these skills that we were just talking about, struggles to get how they might actually be able to play a role in helping their child develop these skills, give them that. This is an absolutely amazing document. It looks at these executive functioning skills. It breaks them down a little bit differently than I do. It breaks them down into three main groups of executive functioning skills, but it covers everything that I just talked about. And it looks at it based on the child's age. From birth till 6 months, this is what you can expect on executive functioning skills, and this is what you can do to build them. From 6 months to 18 months, I can't remember the exact breakdowns that they have in there, but it looks at each developmental age all the way through adolescence. What can you expect from executive functioning skills? What might a deficit look like? And what can you do to support these executive functioning skills? And some of them are more, do this exercise. Others are, play this game with your kids. Here's how you can play Minecraft with your kid and build executive functioning skills in the process. And so it has a combination of serious activities and fun activities, because the way that kids learn best is by play. So I cannot recommend this document enough. I think I may have included it, and if I didn't include it, it's accessible for free. All right, excellent, very cool. Be mindful that you're going to have a different role and different limitations based on your role, right? If you are meeting with somebody as a police officer, you're probably not going to be working too hard to build somebody's executive functioning skills, because there's just kind of limits on that. You can't say, all right, we're going to take a break from the case now, and we're going to work on shift, all right? So I'm going to tell you that we're going to do one thing, and then I'm going to do something totally different next, just to try and help you build a skill. That might not work in a lot of your roles, but it's also important to know, when is it maybe something I need to accommodate for? How much do I accommodate? And remember, we talked about collaboration, right? And so we collaborate with each other. And some members of the team are going to be more about accommodating and also holding people accountable, whereas other people are going to be more along the lines of, all right, let's walk you through the process of learning. And this is why we collaborate, because with our different roles, we can do different things with the same person, and together we have a whole wraparound approach that really can be very strong. I'm going to skip through just some of these general things, so if you can go to the one that says initiation, or inhibition rather. There we go. Wow, I guess I thought we were skipping more than just one slide. So anyway, inhibition. What can you do with inhibition? If there's somebody struggling with inhibition, work to do what you can to decrease distractions. I know as you're looking at the space where you're doing forensic interviews, you're working at decreasing distractions in those spaces. So, what can you do to decrease distraction? Grounding. Sometimes it's difficult for a person to exercise inhibition because they're almost starting to separate from their mind, the part of their mind that would be doing the inhibition. And so it might be giving them something to hold. It might be having them talk with a pillow on their lap. It might be some other activity that just kind of helps ground them in the present, grounds them in the here and now. And as they are more grounded in the here and now, they have more access to their executive functioning skills, including inhibition. It might involve slowing the pace, and it will very likely involve increasing your inhibition. Poor inhibition kind of can become a snowball, and as the child or parent struggles with their inhibition, it becomes harder and harder for you to exercise your inhibition. So that means that you're taking a deep breath. That means that you're working on you being grounded. And in so doing, sometimes you can stop the snowball effect, either because they had an explosion and expected you to explode back, but you didn't, or because there is simply the effect of, as you increase your calm, in many situations, obviously not all, but in many situations, if you do deep breathing, the client will calm down. If you tense and relax your muscles, the client will calm down. I'm going to do something that you can't do right now. As you hold a cup of coffee. Oh, you can't. Sorry. The client will calm down. Next one. Shift. Give advanced warning. If you can, let the person know what's coming. First we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. Oh, you not only struggle with shift, you struggle with working memory as well. Let me give that to you in writing. A themed discussion or questions with a break between different themes. First, we're going to talk about this theme. Then we're going to take a breather. Then we're going to talk about this theme. Then we're going to take a breather. And that breather gives the person a chance to transition. Because if they struggle with shift, sometimes it's, I really can't transition. And sometimes it takes me longer to transition. So give me a few extra minutes and I'll get there, but I need that few extra minutes. Emotion and focus control, mirrored relaxation, as I was talking about before. As you relax, often, not always, nothing's always, often, the person in the room with you will also relax. One of the things that I've tried to do with my kids, and it's kind of worked in two ways. The more upset I get, the quieter I will talk. One, I'm making sure I'm not screaming at my kids that way. And two, as I start talking more quietly, my kids start listening harder because they have to hear what I say, so now they're intentionally listening. But whether they want to or not, they usually talk quieter too. So it's this mirrored relaxation. A white noise machine might help with focus, minimizing clutter, and then so many other ways to adapt, like smart pens, color-coded and highlighted forms. Anticipate emotional dysregulation, right? There are some times that you are totally shocked that a person got upset. My gosh, I didn't see that coming. There are other times where you know the person's going to get upset. It's just a given. Whether it's the topic, whether it's your knowledge of where the person is at, you know. And if you know they're going to get upset, don't approach it as, well, if they get upset, they get upset. It's not your responsibility to stop them from getting upset. I'm not trying to say you take on their responsibility. But if you know they're going to get upset, you can make sure you have a Kleenex box. You can make sure you have a pillow they can put on their lap. You can, as you get started, I've done this with clients. All right, we're going to talk, and I'm going to tell you something. Hang on one sec. When I tell you, you're going to get really mad, but then give me a second and we'll talk through it a little bit more, and I don't think you'll be as mad when we get done. I'm not controlling their emotion. I'm not taking on the responsibility of controlling their emotion for myself. I'm giving them a heads up so you know I'm going to say something that's probably going to make you upset, but give me a moment, then let's talk about it, and I think you'll be less upset when we get done. And then they're more able to give me until we get done. And consider dissociation. Sometimes if a person is having a hard time focusing, it's because they truly are not there. They truly are gone and another place or another person or part of a person. Initiation. Scheduled breaks. Start things for the client. Sometimes if they struggle starting, you need to start it. It might be, all right, I'm going to fill in the first couple spots and then you need to finish it. Now, this obviously is something that we have to do with balance, because what happens is that a person learns these skills through doing them. So we don't always want to start everything for the person. But I worked with a middle school student, different one than I was talking about before, brilliant kid. Even though the kid was brilliant, he was failing. He was failing because he wasn't turning in his homework. And he wasn't turning in his homework because he never started his homework. And what ended up being the fix was that somebody was designated to always start his homework for a couple of weeks. And then he worked with them to start his homework for a couple of weeks. And then they were with him while he started his homework for a couple of weeks. And then they reminded him to start his homework for a couple of weeks. By the time we got to the end of the school year, his grades were reflecting his ability, because we met him where he was when it came to this executive functioning skill, and didn't just say, okay, then I guess we're going to do it for you. But we did what we needed to and gradually backed off as he became more able to do it himself. Not everybody responds that well, but they might, and you won't know unless you try. Working memory. Deep breathing memory. Hey, you know what? No pressure, but let's just do some deep breathing as I'm talking to you about this. Often, I'll be talking with a kid who will have absolutely no recollection we do deep breathing and they remember. Sometimes it's because they need to calm down. Sometimes they need to feel safe enough before their body will let them remember. And so we do deep breathing memory. Mindfulness exercises, a written checklist of tasks. Rather than telling somebody to do it, give them a list. Maybe it's color-coded. Maybe it's prioritized. Maybe dates by when things need to be done. Maybe here's the task, and here's 20 individual subtasks. Probably 20 is too many. And here's 5 subtasks underneath it, so they don't have to look at do this big thing, but if I do this, this, and this, then I'll get it done. Follow-up calls to see if they remember the information. And sometimes you just need to connect the dots because they're not connecting the dots. All right, we're good. Planning and organization of ideas. State a typical time range for tasks. You want me to do this thing? It's going to take me like forever. Please do this. It usually takes 1 to 3 hours to complete. You helped because in their mind, as they're struggling with planning ahead, they're struggling with the organization of ideas or even conceptualizing how to do it, it's just blossoming into this humongous thing. And you can help by saying, usually takes about an hour. And now you just contained the image of how big it could get and provided a little context for them as they try and organize their thoughts. One task at a time. There are some people that I never ask to do 2 things. I only ever ask them to do 1. Because if I ask them to do 1 thing, it'll get done. If I ask them to do 2 things, nothing will get done. So I only ever ask 1 thing. That's not the case with everybody. But as you get to know people, as you get to know the parents, there will probably be some parents that you ask 1 thing. And it might be, I'm going to ask you to do this, and then I'll shoot you an email midweek asking you to do something else. But you sometimes will just need to ask 1 thing at a time. It might be an infographic, depending on how somebody thinks. It might be organizational tools like a planner, color-coded pens. My gosh, I love color-coded pens. But it might be something as simple as that. And by giving a person, if it's appropriate within the context of your role, a $5 pack of pens, you just enable them to get 50% further along in their case plan because you gave them a color-coded pack of pens. And then templates, which can also help. Organization of materials. Provide a binder box. Give them some place to keep stuff so that there's one designated spot. And maybe you actually label that box for them so it's clear this is for this and only this. Make extra copies. Make digital copies. Send a clear identification. So let's say that you're going to email them something. In the title of that email, let's just say that they eventually lose the document and they try and put in a search for the document into their email. Title the email something that'll show up in a search pretty easily. Search for islands of order. This would be one way to describe my office. Chaos would be another one, but islands of order would be another one. It looks like chaos, but there are little tiny islands of order within it. One of the things we are doing, remember, is we're not just addressing competence, we're addressing confidence. When you highlight that island of order, you just worked on confidence. When you highlight those little successes that they have along the way, whether it's this skill or a different one, you are building the confidence that they need to try the next time. And self-monitoring. The person might not know when they need a break, and so you schedule a break. I've got clients that I know we're going to take a break every 15 minutes. At 14 minutes, I might say, "Are you doing okay?" And they'll say, "Yeah, I'm fine." And at 16 minutes, if we haven't taken a break, they're going to explode or melt down. And so we're just going to take a break at 15 minutes. And at 15 minutes, I might say, "Hey, just as a reminder, sometimes if we go too long, it gets a little bit difficult to work through it. So I'm not doing it all. I'm explaining and I'm helping them learn. So just so you remember, sometimes if we go too long, it gets a little bit intense. So we're just going to take a breather here. You take a break so they don't have to recognize the need. And maybe you model that by saying, we've been talking about this a long time and it's kind of heavy. So I'm just going to take a little bit of a breather and then let's pick up the conversation in 5 minutes. And you just made it okay for them to say they need to take a break when they need to take a break. And that's generally better than blowing up in your office. State a typical time range for tasks. Ask about physical signs of stress as well as emotional indicators. I had this one client who totally had no recognition of his emotional state whatsoever. And then one day, he was on the verge of a panic attack and called his mom, and his mom got there right as it hit full-blown panic attack and was able to help him through it. I'm like, wow, how did you know? Did you feel the stress and anxiety? No, I felt perfectly fine. But in our last session, we said that my neck gets really tense and my jaw starts hurting before a panic attack. And I noticed my neck was really tense and my jaw was hurting, so I figured I'd call my mom. He didn't feel like he was going to have a panic attack. It was just the physical sensation. And then boom, it hit. And so be checking in on the physical side, not just the emotional side. Alternate ways of measuring time, if they struggle to measure time. How are you formulating your questions? And sometimes you might need to monitor for them. Hey, it looks like you might be, it looks like that question I just asked may have bothered you. Do we need to take a little break? So maybe if you can do it in a way, some people are going to take that as, oh, so you're saying I can't control myself then. Is that what you're saying? But again, you know the person, get to know the person, and then maybe you throw out, hey, it looks like this might be bothering you. Let's take a little bit of a break or let's talk about that more. So you might have to do some of the monitoring for them. We're not going to do this group activity, but it might be a great group activity to try back at your CAC, back at your office, back at where you are, just to stop and think about how can you accommodate and how can you help work through and watch for executive functioning deficits in both kids and adults. All right. And so then those are resources, and we can flip to our last one. All righty. Oh, that's right. All right, we are in the home stretch. Do you want a 5-minute break or do you want to plow ahead? Plow ahead? Plow ahead. All right, we're plowing ahead. All right, so first part, real quick again. Hi, I'm still Pete. Remember, it's okay to take care of yourself. See, that was easy. All right, so during this last block of time, what we're looking at is we want to understand the idea of burnout, vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, and compassion satisfaction. We want to look at several risk and protective factors that impact secondary traumatic stress, and then we want to look at both what can I do as an individual and what can the organization with which I work do. This is a very important piece. A lot of times people are willing to talk about, hey, this is what you need to do to take care of yourself. And they forget, you know what? there's an organization that is asking me to do work. And we all know that this is stressful and potentially dangerous work. And that means that the organization has a responsibility too. And so it's important that we acknowledge that and come up with some ways that the organization can also help support us in the work. So I'm going to start by talking about my friend Eric here. Just to clarify, this is my friend Eric. This is not my son-in-law Eric. It's a different Eric. We've got stressed Eric, and then we've got burnt out Eric, who is too tired to pose for the cartoon. Sorry. I love this cartoon, but this cartoon also helps me remember why this is important. Because I remember one day in particular, I had done a full day of therapy, and it was a difficult day of therapy, and it was child and teen come in. I found drugs in my kid's room. Parents and I think 11? Yes, 11-year-old come in. My kid pulled a knife on me this weekend. Parents and not 16-year-old. He ran, and I don't know where he is. And it was boom, 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 the entire day. Drugs, suicide attempt, run away and gone. And at the end of this really difficult day, I get home. My wife had gotten home before I did, and I also always want to preface this as I say this. My wife has an incredibly trauma-intensive job as well, and totally gets the intensity of this work. And so I'm not saying anything that would indicate that she doesn't understand it or doesn't have a hard job herself. She has a harder job than I do. I get home, and my wife says to me, "Your daughter used to tone with me. You need to go talk to her." And I'm like, atone? Atone? No knife, no drugs, and she didn't run. We're good. But you know what? That's not what my wife needs. And that's not what my daughter needs. Because then I'm not showing up. And my friends and my family need me to show up. My clients need me to show up. And that's why we're talking about this, because we have to show up. So, when we talk about it, it's something that's pervasive. Secondary traumatic stress. The idea of somebody else has trauma, and now I'm carrying part of that weight. That's the idea behind secondary traumatic stress. It's not that I'm carrying my own trauma, it's that I'm carrying somebody else's trauma. Over 50% of the child welfare workforce show functional impairment, and we talked some about these statistics before. It is incredibly prevalent. There is the difference. One, we've got post-traumatic stress disorder, which is related to your own trauma. We've got secondary traumatic stress, which is related to somebody else's trauma. There's now growing awareness that somebody else's trauma might actually be enough to give you PTSD if you have constant exposure to it. Right now, the diagnostic manual specifically states constant exposure through your work. But actually, in that article I referenced earlier about use of images during forensic interviewing, we talk some about it's not just exposure through work. There's other ways that you can have exposure to pictures and representation of trauma that can actually likely bring about post-traumatic stress disorder or trauma symptoms, even if that's not recognized yet in the DSM. So we can go on. So it's prevalent, and we're dealing with a few things. We're dealing with burnout. Burnout is the incredible stress of your. Any of you have a stressful job? A little bit? A little bit? All right. Some of you might have a stressful job. So you can have burnout even if your job has nothing to do with trauma. My son's wife's parents, her dad is an accountant. And during tax season, which may be traumatic for some, but during tax season, even if he's not interacting with trauma, he's starting to feel burnt out just because of the demands of the job. And the thing of it is, do you know what? That's not a surprise. Everybody knows during tax season, he's going to get stressed out. And that's the way it is with secondary trauma and with burnout. This isn't a surprise. It's predictable. We know it's going to happen. We don't need to be surprised. We can prepare for it because we know it's going to happen. So this is burnout. It does not rely on the presence of somebody else's trauma, but it does bring about that difficulty performing your job, irritability, that sense of incredible fatigue that you're just trying to get away from work and not having to think about it. And then we've got secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably. They actually have a slightly different meaning. One is more related to a single incident exposure, and one is more related to exposure over time. But we don't need to worry about that today. So what do we have with secondary traumatic stress and vicarious trauma? We end up actually with symptoms that are very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. We end up with the intrusive thoughts where we can't stop thinking about it. You ever go home at the end of the day and you can't shut it off? You can't stop thinking about that kid. You can't stop thinking about that family. You can't stop thinking about that meeting that you had with that youth, and you're like, oh my gosh, I wish there was more I could do. That's an intrusive thought. It's a hallmark symptom of PTSD. And now you're experiencing it because of secondary exposure. Intrusive thoughts are the most commonly reported symptom, but you've got other indicators. You become more indecisive. You're unable to relax and unwind. You're easily irritated. You feel unworthy. You ever go home and feel like you're just a total failure at your job? And like you should have been able to fix it for that kid. You should have been able to take care of that family. And this is part of that exposure. And even though we are doing this job with our heart and with every bit of skill, we go home and all we see is how we've blown it. Behavioral indicators, withdrawal, you work harder and you get less done. You smoke more, you drink more, you gamble more, you escape because it's too difficult to think. There's physical indicators. You get headaches, stomach aches, pain that doesn't necessarily have a reasonable explanation or identifiable source, but it's just there. Fatigue, decreased sex drive. It's all there, and it's a physical manifestation of this exposure you have had. And as I talk about that, I'm not going to ask you, what have you experienced? I'm going to say, what have you seen people experience? Whether it's a coworker, a friend, whoever, when it comes to burnout and secondary trauma. How have you seen it show up for people? This is the interactive piece again. I know we're getting late. There's not too much interaction left, I promise.
My husband is our pastor at our church, but he's also worked for the last 14 years as a chaplain with a local hospice.
Wow.
And so he has seen everything from, obviously people are
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Earlier this year, we got to the point because he was becoming miserable on his job that we just said, you got to give that up.
Mm.
And he just
Yeah.
had to give it up. It
Yeah.
didn't come from a lack of compassion or a lack of wanting to, but he just physically and emotionally could not go. I mean, every day became such a chore, and he got to the point where he felt like he wasn't helping anybody.
Yeah.
The things you said, PTSD, I have no doubt,
Hmm.
because of what he's seen,
Yeah.
what he's dealt with, and trying to help people in a terrible time in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have to give it up for his sake and our family's sake. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
He came home from work one day recently, he decided to flip houses. I won't go there. At our age, that's probably not the best time to become a carpenter. But he would come home, came home the first week, and he was drenched in sweat and filthy and could, barely walk down the hall. And he's like, everything hurts. I'm hot, I'm sweating, and everything in my body aches, and I've never been happier.
Wow.
He didn't have the emotional part.
Yeah.
He just hammered the nail, cut the board, laid the floor. He did, and he was more content doing that. And we got to the point where we
Yep.
realized he had to stop.
Yeah. And you're highlighting an incredibly important thing, and that is setting a boundary. And sometimes we need to set the boundary ourselves, and sometimes it means I'm done for today. I know there's more that I have to do, but I'm done for the day. Sometimes it means I'm done for the week. Sometimes it means I need to take some time off. Sometimes it means I need to flip houses instead. But it is so important to set a boundary, and so important that we work in conjunction with our organizations to determine how much there's allowance for that, but as much as that can occur, that the organization then helps and accepts that boundary. Obviously, there are going to be some limitations with that. If everyone decides the same day that they need to be done, but yet somebody needs to be answering the phones, somebody might not be able to take the rest of the day off. So there's a balance there, and it's going to be perhaps limited. But the key is it's not just on you to set the boundary. It's when it's possible, your job accepts that boundary. Super important. Thank you. So we've talked about burnout and secondary traumatic stress. And let me tell you, if that's all there was about this job, I'd be done. I'd be gone, because that's, secondary traumatic stress and burnout do not thrill me. But what does is compassion satisfaction. That sense of fulfillment. How many of you have ever gone home at the end of the day and thought, I helped that kid. I helped that family. I made a difference. That's compassion satisfaction. That is an incredible fulfillment. And it protects us. Because it's that compassion satisfaction that often is what carries us through the times of burnout, the times of increased secondary traumatic stress exposure. So it's that compassion satisfaction. We want to try as much as we can to focus on that. And one of the things that helps us focus on it is hope. And if there's one particular thing that I can encourage you to that helps, I think, with secondary traumatic stress and burnout, that's focusing on hope. And this can help us, and it can help our families that we're working with and the kids that we're working with. When I talk about hope, I referenced earlier that it wasn't, I hope that there's coffee and suddenly there's coffee, although today that actually happened to work. But it's deeper than that. So this type of hope that I'm talking about, you can read about it in this incredible book by Shan Hellman and Casey Gwynn called Hope Rising, How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. And it's written by some people that work extensively with at-risk youth. And in the midst of all the trauma, in the midst of all the despair, in the midst of all these factors that are putting these kids at risk, where do you find hope? And they break hope into two distinct parts. One is willpower, and one is way power. Now, willpower is the ability to see the goal and believe you can make it. To see, I can get my kids back, and believe that you can. To see, I can make a difference for this family, and believe that you can. To see, I can make a difference in this system, and believe that you can. I will say that willpower rests incredibly strongly on attachment. Having had that secure base and safe haven so that it's okay to dream about what you might do and then go out and try for it. Knowing that even if it doesn't work out, you'll have your safe haven to come back to. So this comes back to our discussion of attachment. And then the next piece is way power, the ability to see the path and stay on it, to keep moving forward even when that path gets hard. You are on a hard path. This is not an easy job. I don't care if you're here as a probation officer, as a cop, as a social worker, as a forensic interviewer, as a director, as whatever position you are in. If you are in this field, you do not have an easy path. But you have seen a path and you are on that path. And this aspect of hope is the ability to see that path and stay on it. And this element of hope depends on executive functioning skills. It is going to be so hard, even if that parent does believe they can reach that goal, to stay on the path if they're struggling with executive functioning skills. And so this hope rests on that. And this hope leads us to 4 beliefs. I want to say real quickly, too, how do I know that this hope is powerful? How do I know that this hope makes a difference? They actually have done studies. And in one particular study, they looked at college students to see what factors impacted their success in college. And the 3 things that they looked at ACT score. How does that relate to your success in college? High school GPA. How does that relate to your success in college? And on that previous slide, there was a link to a hope scale. It's just a brief questionnaire that looks at both willpower and way power components of hope. And of those 3, what they found was the most predictive of success in college was their score on the hope scale. Because you can be as brilliant as you want. And if you don't have hope, that won't do you any good. So the most predictive thing was hope. And one of the most predictive things for you in your job is hope. And that's how you're going to tap into that compassion satisfaction. That's how you're going to find the energy to keep at it, to keep going. Hope gives rise to 4 key beliefs. The future will be better than right now. That it's not just about what happens to me, but I actually have a say in that. I actually can impact what it's going to be like. That there are multiple paths. When I started college, I knew my purpose was to help people. And when I started as a pre-med major, or in a pre-med program, I knew that that was my goal. And my sophomore year, as an elementary education major, I still knew that that was my goal. And then I had to take some time off. And then when I came back as a psychology major, I still had my same goal. My path was changing, but my goal never did. And that's a part of this. There's not a single path to the goal. And so if this doesn't work, if this treatment program didn't work, maybe this treatment program will, because I'm going to find another path. If this route didn't work with this family, maybe this route will, because we're going to find another path. And we're going to find the path that gets us there. And then the recognition, every single one of those paths is going to be filled with obstacles. There is no cakewalk. There is no easy journey. And so we enter into this recognizing it will be hard, but we will get there. Based on time, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but to think about and maybe even have as an exercise on your own or with your CAC, your office, or whatever. Where do you find compassion, satisfaction, and hope? Maybe at your next staff meeting, that's the focus. Where are we all finding hope? Where do we get our satisfaction from? Because hope is contagious. And as you share stories of hope, you build each other's hope. I'm going to quickly highlight risk factors. Number one risk factor, and this is so important to recognize. Everyone who works with individuals with a history of trauma is vulnerable to secondary traumatic stress. Does anyone fall into the everyone category? We're all vulnerable. The fact that you're vulnerable is not a weakness. I can actually give you one simple step that will stop you from ever having to deal with secondary traumatic stress. Just don't care. If you don't care, it won't bother you. If, however, you do not find that acceptable, then we have to understand this. And the fact that you care is not a weakness. The fact that you care is a strength. The very thing that makes you good at this work, that lets you connect, is what puts you at risk. And it cannot be overstated. That is not a weakness. That is a strength. And you have chosen to use that strength in a way that puts yourself at risk. And that's commitment. And that's a strength too. When we think about risk factors, it's important to think about different areas all coming together. Work environment. What are things like where I work? What's the office like? What's the system in which I'm functioning like? This is a huge piece. Client environment. What's going on in my client's life? What's going on in that kid's life? What's going on in that family's life? That's another huge piece. Personal environment. What's going on in my life? These things all work together to impact how much we are at risk for secondary traumatic stress. On the personal front, you can see many things up here, many things that probably a lot of you are dealing with, a lot of risks that you might have, and we've talked about some of those, like a personal history of abuse or trauma. Emotional restrictions. Don't feel that way here. These are all things that might leave you more at risk. And in a survivor or a witness, sexual abuse is the type of abuse that generally leaves you most vulnerable. The younger the child, the more intense and complex the trauma, the more high profile it is. If you ever have to testify, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh my gosh, all this family needs is somebody that can help pay the rent, and we'd be so much better off, and I don't have any way to help them get rent. These are all factors that make it harder and leave you more at risk. And your organization impacts it. An unsupportive organization, inadequate training and preparation, and sometimes that rests with the organization, and sometimes that rests with the programs that we're going to school in and that don't always prepare us for the work. It's one of the reasons that Victor, who was here speaking before, started the CAST program, the Child Advocacy Studies program, because he saw all these programs turning out graduates that weren't prepared to deal with kids who'd been abused. And they were turning out child protection workers who weren't prepared to deal with kids who'd been abused, and doctors and nurses and lawyers. And so he worked to develop that. You can see all these organizational factors, some of them within the control of the organization and some of them that are more systemic. If the system says you have to jump through hoops, you don't have much say in that. You have to jump through hoops. Low pay, an emphasis on just processing the client, get done with them, move along. The structure, punitive leadership, inadequate supervision and support, and teamwork. The power of those in helping us manage secondary traumatic stress cannot be overstated. We are at risk of secondary traumatic stress because we chose to enter relationship with somebody. Secondary traumatic stress comes to us directly from relationship. And what helps us survive it and get through it is the exact same thing, relationship. And so the supervision and the teamwork that we do helps and brings us right back to collaboration as a trauma-informed principle. And I'm sorry I'm rushing through all these so much. But there are protective factors as well. Pretty much the opposite of a risk factor is a protective factor. In addition to that, we've got things like creativity. How many of you feel like you've ever come up with a creative solution to a problem at work? Oh my gosh, how amazing does that feel? Like, hey, I had this idea, it was off the wall and wacky, but it worked. The ability to use that creativity is huge. That sense of faith and spirituality is huge because it helps us find some context for all the garbage we see. Maintaining a strong set of personal norms. Sometimes the things that we are asked to do fly in the face of our values. And that can be very hard. And being able to maintain our strong values helps us as we face this stress. The optimistic outlook, the chance to express our feelings, having hope. Compensation. How many people feel they are paid enough? But compensation helps. And again, this is a restraint to the system, in part. Supportive and reflective supervision, empowerment, and then as you go down there, trauma-informed practices. They protect us. Things that we can do. We have our own coping strategies. Lots of tools like the self-care wheel, The ProQual is another tool. The ProQual is an assessment that looks at compassion satisfaction, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress. You can do that individually. It's 30 questions. You can do that as an organization, but then don't require people to share their answers with you. But so that is an option as well. And then self-care apps like Headspace. Go to the University of Buffalo School of Social Work's webpage. They have self-care plans there. Use those self-care plans. That might even be a project that you do as a team. Maybe there's a component of it that you can do together and then a component that you do individually. But they have tons of information on secondary traumatic stress, and they have self-care plans for both ongoing traumatic stress and crisis level secondary traumatic stress. Complete the stress response cycle. Our bodies are geared for stress. You need to deal with stress. You need to experience stress. It's a good thing. But we also need to complete the cycle. And sometimes we get stuck and we get activated, we mobilize to do something, and we stay mobilized, and we stay mobilized, and we stay mobilized, and we never get to deactivate. And we never get to move to restoration. If you want to see the stress response cycle play out beautifully, and then think about how that might apply to me, do a YouTube search for lion versus 21 hyenas. And you will see the most incredible footage with an amazing narrator with an awesome voice, walking you through a lion, a single lion, as it faces 21 hyenas constantly coming at it. And I'm not going to tell you what happens, but I will tell you no animals were killed in the making of this video. Recognize yourself. Know yourself. How do you respond to stress? You know how you respond so that you can manage it. Balance. You are a complex human being. There is not one thing you need to do. You are complex. That means sometimes you are just sitting in the feeling. You're just there. Sometimes you're thinking about it. You're trying to figure this problem out. And sometimes, forget just being, forget thinking, it's time to act. And so you're balancing all of these. You share your struggles. You share your victories. You share your innovations. I bet this past year has seen about the most innovation that this field has ever experienced. Share that with each other. You guys have been brilliant this last 18 months. Share it with each other. And share stories of hope. Develop creativity, personal hobbies, all of these things. Again, trauma-informed care. But it's not just about us individually, it's about organizations. This study points out, when they were looking at managing secondary traumatic stress, the study in particular was in law offices dealing with clients in the child protection system, if I'm remembering correctly. Individual approaches did not reduce traumatic stress scores of the staff. Instead, they recommended institutional interventions. You can do all the self-care you want, and if you don't have a supportive organization, it's not going to work. It's just not. On the flip side, you can have the most supportive organization in the world, and if you don't take care of yourself, it's not going to matter. This is, going back to trauma-informed principles again, collaboration. We are doing this together. Promote effective work-life balance. Provide training, like this little bit here. Rotating caseloads when possible, not always. A reasonable level of control to staff. Acknowledge and celebrate little accomplishments and big accomplishments alike. Provide follow-up assistance, social support, and resources. Policies and procedures that explicitly direct secondary traumatic stress so that when somebody comes in, they read, oh, that's a thing. And oh, you know it is, and you're taking steps to take care of me as an organization. Debriefing, both critical incident stress debriefing and ongoing debriefing. I mentioned that school that I worked with for 2.5 years. During that 2.5 years, we implemented a debriefing program where we did critical incident stress debriefing. But beyond that, the debriefer was just there every other week. And people could come and talk to the debriefer every other week. We ended up having roughly 250 staff a year access debriefing in a school district that had 400 staff. That's the majority of staff were accessing debriefing. The first year that we did debriefing, the number one thing that came up in debriefing was the nightmares staff were having about work. Intrusive thoughts. So to implement a debriefing program, at least critical incident, but preferably ongoing debriefing. Setting limits for staff who struggle to do so, promote diverse and balanced caseloads, and have an outside set of eyes come in and help. Organizational tools, like we talked. The ProQual would be one, and there's another one that I think I've got a picture of coming up called the Secondary Traumatic Stress Informed Organizational Assessment. Just be aware, it's a 1 to 4 scale. The best organization that I've worked with so far ended up with an average of 1.9 on the 4-point scale. So we don't think about all the things that make up effective secondary traumatic stress management in an organization. So bear in mind, the best organization so far that I've worked with has been at a 1.9 out of 4. Allow people to have their emotions, a buddy system, a preceptor program, trauma-informed care. Again, what are we looking at with the buddy system and preceptor program? Relationship. There's that secondary traumatic stress-informed organizational assessment, STSOIA, in case you're wondering. We're not going to take time for this, but again, a good activity back at your office, your CAC, next staff meeting. Bibliography, and it's 3:40. Thank you everyone very much for being here today. Thank you. I'm sorry it was so rushed at the end, and thank you all for the incredible work that you do for kids and families. You make such a profound difference.
Thank you, Pete. And yes, thank you as our team members. We put on this training every year. We write a grant with our local DHRs. And it's just for our team. It's not something we have to do, but we want to do it because we know education and training is so important in the work that we do, and to help the children that we serve. But I do have a few things to go over with y'all before we get done that is important that you will need to know. I will email evaluations, and please, I really look at those evaluations for suggestions for next year's training. If you have any complaints about coffee or anything, you can put that in there as well. Keep in mind, though, when we write these grants, I wanted to say this because I forgot to say it earlier, and I'm usually better about this, but these grants do not cover our food. It covers the event venue that we use. It covers our speaker's fee and his travel, but we depend on our relationships in the community to fill in the gaps for us. So Texas Roadhouse graciously provided your meal today. Coke also donated a slew of Coke and water products for you to drink, and we're very grateful for them for filling the gaps for us in a situation like that. So I wanted to give a shout out to them as well. The other thing about the food, we have plenty extra. So if you want to come in the kitchen and grab a few of these extra, be glad to do it. We do not want to bring anything home. Take it with you. Take all the honey buns, take all the granola bars, take all your pens and pads if you want. Those are for you. We will also email certificates, just general certificates. If you're law enforcement, you just need something that says, I got an 8-hour training. We will do that for you and email it. I'll email those to all of those. However, for the people who want specific credits, if you need licensed social work credits, come see me after I get done talking. If you are an attorney, judge, whatever, you need Alabama bar CLEs, please come up to this front table, write your name down, and write your bar number so that I will have it. I have to send your number, I have to do it to Montgomery. So it will make it a lot easier for you trying to get those credits if I know that you wanted them. So please add that to the list up here at the front, at this front table. Let's see. Have I forgotten anything? I think that's it. Terry, anything you can think of? Thank you for being here. Thank you. We appreciate what you do, and we're glad you were able to come. Thanks so much.